What is the greatest film of all time? Every 10 years, the British film magazine Sight and Sound holds an international critics poll, and it was usually topped by Citizen Kane. And then, in 2012, Orson Welles' bold debut was usurped by Alfred Hitchcock's psychological masterpiece, Vertigo. But this shift was trifling compared with the bombshell of 2022, when Chantal Akerman's Jeanne DIELMAN leapt from 36 10 years ago to number 1 today. Why? Maybe it's because the magazine conspicuously expanded their electorate to include a wider array of voices. Maybe it's because the internet and Whisper It file sharing allowed more people to watch Akerman's films. Maybe it's because the film's themes of invisible feminine labour and the identity of its director aligned with a culture trying to address its past failings. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because Jeanne DIELMAN is one of the most remarkable pieces of cinema ever made. Jeanne DIELMAN stars Delphine Seyrig in the titular role. She is a widowed housewife who earns money quietly prostituting herself. Her repetitive life in a chintzy apartment in Brussels is documented in a series of long, mostly interior wides. Over the course of 200 minutes, her routines unravel, and their unraveling foreshadows a shocking climax. It's a film that shows you almost everything, and yet gives very little away. An open window, a potato peeler, buttons on a jacket. The devil is in the detail, and the details are domestic. Joining me to discuss this is, as ever, my co-host, Owen Vince.
You almost forgot my name. You paused.
Yes, well, I've just been countersigning Owen's passport.
Yeah, exactly.
Some domestic
may
detail.
remember that I lost that passport in Berlin.
Oh yes, there's a bit of continuity for regulars.
Callback.
So my inability to remember Owen's name must be thought of in the context of me having just written it down several times.
Like Delphine Seyrig, you've had basically a small slip that's going to precipitate a later kind of dramatic moment of cathexis or unraveling, I think.
Precisely. Yeah. But to get to the point, you know, like me, you watched this at a young age because it was, you know, it's not part of the canon for everybody.
It was always already an important, significant film. It was a reference point. I mean, a lot of filmmakers have. I suppose people, when they say they admire film like Jeanne DIELMAN, they are making a certain sort of topographical claim in the landscape of film about slowness and about character portrait studies. Yeah. It is interesting that these prior 3 films that occupied this kind of numero, like the big kahuna, are all in their own ways and in very different, formulations and rhythms, character studies that are inherently in a kind of big P, psychological in a way. Yeah.
So Bicycle Thieves, Citizen Kane, and Vertigo.
Yeah, I mean, maybe less Bicycle Thieves because it's a social realist film. That's just.
But the main character is very
but particularly Kane, and Kane is very assiduously a film which is about the kind of, I suppose, unknowability of a public life told through the lens of different public perceptions of them and private perceptions. Vertigo, very much like the case of a film about psychoanalysis, or effectively not a film about psychoanalysis, but a film that has attracted so many it's been overburdened by psychoanalytic readings.
It's very much a manifestation of the internal external through external means.
Yeah, and both of those films are, in their own way, formally innovative, still very exciting. And then Jeanne DIELMAN is really kind of just sipping from the same cup. It is formally daring and bold in a very different way, where a film like Vertigo uses a sense of fragmentation and dissonance and very clever play with the camera and the lens and space. What you have with Jeanne DIELMAN is this kind of this even paced, so like you said, you've got these wides, no reaction shots, no shot, counter shot, no close-ups. So it's shot in this in a way we would consider it is part of the structural film movement. Something that's, inhabited typically by characters like Michael Snow. This is very much a structural film, an observational film about domestic routine, gendered labor, in an evacuated of context. And I think maybe one of the reasons why Jeanne DIELMAN has survived as a film is that it is partaking in certain very prominent dialogues in the 70s about gender and equality and feminism, but it translates very well. It's a film that could be shot today. It's a film that could have been made in the 1910s, because there is no sense of historical even location.
I don't think it could have been, in terms of the language of the evolution of the language of film. I can't see. I just mean like the reference. In the silent era,
yeah, like almost the reference that you would use to situate the film in the 70s. It really
domestic labor continues to exist.
Exactly. So I think there's a sense where there's this kind of irony with the title of the film. Actually, I find really interesting because it has the actual full title of the film. Jeanne Dielman.
23 Quai de Commerce, 1080 Brussels.
1080 Brussels. And it's this very specific context. It's very specific, situates in a really particular place. But it really isn't about that place at all in any sense. Like, it's actually kind of historical in a lot of senses. Feels like.
But it is about Jeanne Dielman. But then Jeanne Dielman is a very hard to understand character in a certain way. She's
unpack that. In what way is she hard to understand? Because she doesn't like articulate her feelings.
As I said, as I said in the intro, we see a lot of her, and yet we're constantly sort of we're unaware of her her deeper intentions. We can't really sort of. She's not someone who narrativizes herself. She only gets on with what she needs to do in that moment.
Yeah.
And there are these various conversations with her son which probably are the areas where you gain the most insight into her kind of humor and her attitude. You know, there's this moment where he's talking about, in quite a matter-of-fact way, talking about how he was, when he first discovered what sex was, one of his friends at school told him what sex was, and he was alarmed at the idea that his father was doing this,
to his mum.
Nasty thing to his mum. And he says that he used to try and like scream to try and just to try and stop him doing it to her. And she kind of just wryly says that wasn't necessary. We weren't fucking by that point, and it's like, and the little moments like that give you an idea into her sort of like resignation, her kind of glib resignation to a life that is broadly free of genuine pleasure, and a life where she doesn't really have like a huge amount of respect for herself.
Or there's a sense of resignation, yes, and also the flickerings of a slightly ironic personality who is aware of the you get a sense that she's aware of her situation. She's not a drone. She's not thoughtless. These little moments give you enough of a flavour of Jeanne Dielman as a personality that you sense a very active, dynamic, quite ironic mind. And that actually makes it more crushing that she is somebody who has fully lent into just the habitus of this domestic life.
I wonder if that humour is, whether it's actual ironic humour or whether it's just this very extreme restraint, and then the humor exists with the audience where I
found her quite compelling in those moments. She comes alive a little bit in those moments. There's a very quite an attractive, I don't mean that in a necessarily erotic way, but just an attractive personality. You think there's more there, I think. And I think there's this really interesting, so we were both watching the as it were, I hate to use this phrase, making of film, or there are behind the scenes footage that was shot during the making of Jeanne Dielman, black and white kind of handheld camera thing. But there's these interesting pushes and pulls between Delphine Seyrig and Chantal Akerman. You remember how young Chantal Akerman was at this
25.
time? 25, really young. And these great scenes. You've got this grand dame of European art house film, Delphine Seyrig, smoking her cigarette in the cigarette holder, and she's perusing the script. And she's actually offering really quite helpful advice to Chantal Akerman. She's saying, why do you want it shot like this? And Chantal Akerman has this moment where she kind of can't answer, and she kind of laughs in this, because she's not entirely sure. She's got an image of the film in her head, and actually it's Delphine Seyrig who's coming in as this very, her manner is very Jeanne Dielman-esque, quite arch, poised, very careful. She's already inhabiting the character. Whether that is how Delphine Seyrig was, or whether she was quote unquote method acting as Jeanne Dielman, I don't know.
No, I've seen interviews with Delphine Seyrig. There's a great interview with her when she's talking about how she worked with Marguerite Duras. And I think there's
on like India Song and
yeah, but the first film they did together was called La Musica, and on the special features on the Criterion disc of India Song, there's an interview with Delphine Seyrig. She's speaking English actually, and she says that when she first worked on La Musica, I think she was kind of co-directing with a male director whose name has fallen out of history.
Perfect.
But
many such cases.
Well, it was just a very all-male crew, and she'd been put on it, and she wasn't even. She was too short to sort of see through the viewfinder of the camera, so she didn't know what the shots looked like, and the DOP was kind of handling this, and Delphine Seyrig says, no, you must ask to see what the shot looks like. You must ask, and you see this very much in the making of by Sami Fry. It's called Auteur de Jeanne Dielman. Yeah. You can see another guy has uploaded it to their Vimeo, and you can see very much this funny power dynamic where Chantal Akerman, this is her second feature film.
Yep.
Her first feature film is probably one of the most I mean, it's a masterpiece. Just to it's really great. I mean, I kind of oscillate between that being my favorite Akerman and this one, but yeah, in Je tu LL, she's in the film. Most of the shots seem to just be like shots that she's set up basically, and then like there's very few other people involved in Je tu LL. It's probably the most in that era. It's probably the most self-filmed, the easiest. On a practical level, the easiest film you could make without getting other people involved.
When the funding spigots were actually quite active, actually, even Jeanne Dielman received a grant of $120,000.
Right, yeah. And also with making film, like you couldn't just do it on your phone. You really did need to like get some money.
Yeah.
But Je tu LL, like not to diminish it because I love it, but like Je tu LL is so much the film of someone who doesn't really isn't sociable. I mean, to be a film director, basically, in general, you have to be an extrovert. You have to be extremely sociable,
dominant.
And you have to be happy to boss people around a bit. Yeah. And if you want to kind of get ideas from your collaborators, you have to do that in a very extroverted, responsive way. And Chantal Akerman, basically quite a sad girl, basically quite a reclusive, introverted person. And Je tu LL is the film of an introvert. It's basically loads of shots of her on her own, eating sugar, being miserable. Yeah. And then Jeanne Dielman, she's on set with a massive star. This woman's been in last year Marienbad, Muriel René films, and so on.
The legacy that she's inheriting with this character, and actually asking, I think the irony that she's asking this quite aristocratic figure in her, in
art house
film in a way, this very patrician figure, the way she's holding and bearing herself in this shot where she's sitting perusing this script, and Chantal Akerman, like an acolyte, is kind of crouched at her side and glances occasionally. She'll glance at the camera constantly, Sami Fry's camera, in embarrassment, and you can really sense this quite tortured power dynamic, which obviously when you see the film, when you watch Jeanne Dielman, prior to watching that, you get a sense of this hyper confident, very competent, and which Chantal Akerman obviously was. But it's really enlivening to see this director really trying to figure out, and actually kind of prompted and pushed by Delphine Seyrig, who gets her to these places by interrogating shot choice. Chantal Akerman knows she wants to shoot in a particular way, but Seyrig is like, but why? Why are you doing this way? And then she's like saying, well, there's instructions about how Jeanne Dielman brushes her hair in these kind of repetitive, slow things. She's like, well, how do you brush your hair? And she actually gets Chantal Akerman to brush her own hair. She's like, well, that's not so different from what you're saying here. So where's the kind of the sort of difference?
Yeah, I think on the whole, I mean, Seyrig comes across as quite conservative in a lot of ways. She basically is constantly asking Chantal Akerman, why aren't you making this film in a more conventional way? Why aren't you giving me like more room to shine? But like classic actor just wants,
which is funny
wants to give it more personality.
The old Marienbad.
Yeah, of course. But she's an actor now. Actors always, not always, but very often are like this. She doesn't just want to be like a Bressonian model. And I think we'll talk about Bresson in a moment. But this is the interesting tension. Like, actually, if you look at that documentary about the making of Jeanne Dielman, you find that where the things that Chantal Akerman sticks up for generally came to pass in the making of the film. She does get her way. She does have a vision, and so Seyrig knows that and recognizes that. To say on the Bresson thing, I think I've long like puzzled over why it is that Jeanne Dielman particularly has this Bresson-like quality in its restraint, and yet I sort of know fundamentally that it's doing a different thing from, say, Une Femme Douce or
So just to, in the interest of, I'll start, so I'll let you finish, but in the interest of maybe an audience who aren't as au fait with Bresson famously wanted to use his actors as mannequins and really decried the idea of the uncontrollable spark of the actor to intuit lines and responses. He wanted to use his actors like machines who would do things with a great sense of poise, deliberateness, and elegance almost, which is robotic. So a lot of
he called them models, not actors. And he never worked with professional. Almost never worked with professionals.
That's why you get lots of these a lot of the habitual gestures and movements in Bresson films are so deliberate and glacial and robotic. So that's what Ralph is talking about when he's talking about Bresson having this sense of artifice about how bodies are used in Bresson films and how they're represented in Bresson films. There we go. That's the breakout box.
Very well summarized. No, I like that. And Bresson has a very distinctive style, as you say, and a very distinctive personal method, which he was always extremely assertive. According to the record, maybe that's male privilege or whatever, but he never had any doubt over that being how he wanted his films to be. Whereas I think you see certain kind of tensions in the way that Akerman works here. But basically, I think the difference is that Akerman is in this particular project trying to engender a sort of blankness in the performances because of the subject matter and because of the way she wants to reveal things, which is quite similar to Bresson. But I think with Bresson, he made films about a wide variety of things, Knights of the Round Table, petty crime, whatever.
L'argent, about money, about theft, about criminals, about priests, about existential crises, so on and so on.
And he always just used exactly the same method, which was a method of not having the actors actually express their emotions directly, but kind of showing
show
it,
not tell,
showing it exactly. Yeah. The most extreme version of show not tell was just showing everything through actions. I love Bresson, but anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up as a distinction.
I think there's Jeanne Dielman her mannerisms are, she's a subject produced by the conditions of her labor and her times. That's the impression we get. Whereas a Bresson film, all of the principal characters behave in this robotic way. Whereas with Jeanne Dielman, to an extent, the son is a deliberate personality, but he's a teenager, so he's got a bit more looseness about him and a bit more scrappiness and a bit more, just he's a teenage boy. He doesn't have necessarily the precision of Jeanne Dielman. So you're aware she's particularly produced by this, whereas Bresson, all the characters have this deliberateness. It's very rare to see someone in a Bresson film who
it's a whole world he creates.
It's an entire world where everyone is like this, and it's because it's the auteur's vision for how he wants to use acting. Whereas here, you're very aware of Delphine Seyrig, Jeanne Dielman, being a subject produced by the economic and social conditions of her time as a woman, a single mother, raising a child. But what I will say, because I think it's important to lay out the fabula of this film. It's a 3 hour and 15-minute film that takes place over 3 days. So you're really looking at an hour for each day, day and night cycle. What happens is we see Jeanne Dielman's daily habitus, which is to clean, to buy groceries, to prepare a meal for her son, to prepare the flat, and also crucially to have she's a sex worker. She's, so she has a client over each afternoon while her son's at school. She sleeps with them. That's how she makes her money. So that is the film. Obviously, spoiler alert, this unravels. It's a small series of minor inconveniences to her routine. We could even call it a ritual.
Can I just describe some of these?
Yeah, describe these things that
I saw it the other night.
Knock her off course, basically. There's certain things that happen that knock her off balance.
She overcooks her potatoes because she takes sees the client in the first. We see the first day
when we first meet her, she's meeting a client at the very beginning, I believe.
So the first day we see her, everything is going broadly to plan. So we know what she should be doing. So on the day 2, we notice that she doesn't take the potatoes out before she has her bath after she's seen the client. So the potatoes are overcooked. When she realizes the potatoes are overcooked, she has to throw them in the bin. And then she goes to the this paper bag, and she realizes that there's only one potato left, so she has to go to the shop. And then when she's come back from the shop, her son comes back from school, and there's this extraordinary moment where he comes back from school and he like goes towards the living room where presumably she always is at this time when he's coming back from school, and she's not there, and he says maman, almost as if she's died or something. It's really crazy, like how like my mum when I was a child was she's a great lover of routines, but I wouldn't be sure which room she'd be in when I got home. Like really extreme, like precision.
It's a really telling detail.
And the fact that she's not in the living room, and also she has this habit for saving a cost of living crisis. She switches the lights off every time she leaves a room, so you always know kind of where she is, where she isn't. She's obviously in the kitchen still cooking because she's now peeling the potatoes. She's delayed on the meal. So this is like presenting a real crisis. There are various other details. She drops a shoe that she's polishing for her son. She has this very strange experience with coffee where she drinks the coffee with milk. It doesn't taste right, but she can't tell whether it's the milk or the coffee. And she
prepares it again. She makes the coffee again, and that's obviously adding extra. All these small. It's an avalanche in a way that starts with a snowball because of these little things that knock her routine out by 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And we feel the time. We feel because we have to sit through it again. So you're feeling the tension of these things. It's a great way of communicating the tension. Whereas a more dynamic film would have had the character go, "Drats, I've fuck the coffee, so I need to make it again," and we get a very quick thing. But
there's no doll.
There's no doll. Yeah, exactly. We live the extra time because we have to, as it were, endure the extra time with her. So as much as it frustrates her rhythm, it also frustrates our rhythm to reach the catharsis of the film in a way. And I think there's a great sense of, we watch these tiny perturbances in her routine. Maybe one is fine, but one is enough to cause another because she's distracted and she's out of her groove. And slowly but surely it leads to the third day where she has a client, and there's this really ambiguous scene where we actually see her for the first time having sex. So it's an actual sex scene in the film. Normally we see her enter the room, then leave the room, and it's the only time in the film where Chantal Akerman speeds up time. Is when she goes into that room, because we see them go in, then we see them leave straight away. She jumps time.
Well, I mean, obviously it's not in total real time, but this is a moment where she kind of
camera stays.
purposefully jump cuts.
She purposely jump cuts. So there are a couple of jump cuts in this film. On the third time we actually see her, and the shot is over the bed. It's still not close up. It's still medium. And she's ambiguously either enjoying it or in pain or in a state of disgust. It's very hard to tell whether she's having an orgasm or is feeling revulsion.
I read it as revulsion primarily, but
there's an ambiguity there, though.
There's definitely an ambiguity there, and I think also.
I mean, I've never seen a woman have an orgasm, so I'm just reading into this.
There's websites.
I've read about it. But there's the sense of, so we see her, and what happens is that she then, famously kills him with a pair of scissors. So
and these scissors are. It's just all full of details. She leaves. She gets given a gift by her aunt. This is all foreshadowed. This is all at the very start of the film. She receives a letter from her aunt.
Chekhov's scissors.
Yeah, exactly. And she said, and the letter is like, "Oh, I've delivered something by boat for you, the garment of clothing." And throughout the film, you see her sort of checking for this garment of clothing in her post box, and then finally she sees it just by the post box. It's too big for the post box, and she opens it. She can't get. It's one of those the ribbon's too tightly thing, so she has to go into the kitchen to get the scissors. She goes out. Then the client rings the doorbell, proving that she's out of whack with the time.
She's not ready. She's out of joint.
The schedule. The client rings the doorbell while she's just cut through the present and opened up the present. She opened up the present. It's a nightie, so again confining her to the domestic realm. And so she has to quickly hide the gift, put it under the bed, and the scissors are just sort of in her hand, and she just kind of leaves them. And this is why I think it's great, like, even when you're watching it for the second time, or like you've been told already that this is what happens in the end of the film, the great, beautiful pleasure of seeing the scissors be placed on the side, knowing that something, suddenly realizing, oh, that's how we get to this point, you know, all these different bits, even if you know what's going to happen. It's because the detail is so granular.
That's the thing.
It's still exciting.
If you're going to make a slow film, the detail, that space isn't empty. It needs to be full of something. Actually, I think one of an interesting comparison. I think it's not really a fair comparison at all, but their objectives are wildly different, and their context are wildly different. But you take something like Virus Ethical. And actually, Virus Ethical's approach to time is very important because you're waiting for a thing to happen. You're waiting for a detail. For him, the detail might be the wall of a jungle, and you are waiting to see a detail emerge or to observe a thing that might already be there. But the approach to it goes to show that, in some senses, actually, Jeanne Dielman is still a conventional film. The difference is the camera is very static. So, you know, a Bresson, for example, would have a close-up of a hand laying the scissors, you know, on the table side, and we'd see that. And
this is also a crucial difference is that Akerman forces you to choose your own close-up. You're always given a wide.
100%.
You always have to choose your own close-up.
You lean into it, and it says these things can be missed. Actually, you really, you can really miss these things. And I think it's a different approach to slowness. It's a different approach to how time evolves and how space is imagined, because we're kind of left to wander around these rooms. You spend a lot of time watching this film. Your eyes are just kind of looking into corners, and you're kind of just bumbling around this house. And I think there's an interesting sense where that's not to say there aren't these fantastical details. And I think one of the very great things about Jeanne Dielman is we're reminded that she lives on quite a busy commercial. There is life outside this flat. You know, not only
Quai de Commerce.
Quai de Commerce,
Commercial Road.
Commercial Road, Commercial Street, right?
Whitechapel.
So Whitechapel, represent. There is a persistent blinking light that flashes through the living room, dining room window, and it's the kind of thing that could slowly send you mad. Like this, it's like the beating heart buried underneath the floorboards. You know, it's got this kind of the telltale heart. Sorry, that's the story. There is this pulse, and the pulse is this kind of it's routine. It's like a metronome. But it also reminds you that there is a world out there. The son goes to school and he has conversations about sex, and he has lessons, and she gets a letter from her aunt who lives in America. Right? So there's a wider world that she is Canada. She's not part of. She's not part of this flow of life. It's funny how Akerman would later make letters from home, where a woman, Akerman, as it were, in America, is sending letters to her mother back in Europe, basically, so France or Belgium, whatever. And it's almost like she's kind of sending letters back to Jeanne Dielman in a way, because she doesn't answer these letters. She gets all these letters from her mum, but she never answers. So Letters from Home is, again, this ironic title because she never returns these letters. She just reads them. So there's this sense of, like, I don't know, an ecosystem of Akermanic films that persist simultaneously together and are kind of telling the same story from different perspectives, I think. That's a real reach, that read, but I can't
it's true. But always, I mean, I'm always resistant to kind of invoking biographical detail, but with Akerman, it's like looking at a Van Gogh painting or something. You know, she did kill herself. She and a lot of these videos a lot of these films are about extreme loneliness and sadness and
total alienation,
and someone who just cannot free themselves from sadness. And in a way, the final act of killing the John it's a form of suicide in a way, because she's obviously destroyed any possibility of
returning to the routine.
Yeah, exactly. Like living or having, like whatever. Like you don't even though you have this amazing 7-minute sequence of her just like staring with the, as you say, with the kind of neon shining through the window, reflecting on what's just happened, stained slightly but very noticeably with blood.
In restraint. It's restraint again.
Exactly.
This isn't Zulawski. This is very restrained. Even the murder.
Even though you have that, you don't you don't really get a sense of what she's contemplating, what she's at. You get the beautiful experience of contemplating yourself, what she's thinking. It creates a wonderful gap of what's there and what's not there.
Well, you begin to wonder, in this moment, you realize, what will she do? And it sounds like quite a bait question, but it's a very important one. What will Jeanne DIELMAN do? And it's this big question mark about. This is such an extraordinary, exceptional act, this murder. And you realize you're completely unmoored.
Yeah.
A bad film would give you a sense of what the character would do. You go, well, clearly you can't even say something like, oh, she'd calmly, collectedly dispose of the body in a controlled manner, because you can't say that, because actually everything that's gone on so far has told her that she's unraveling.
I think that's what's amazing about the modulation of this film. And when you watch like a Tarantino film or like whatever, like it's kind of an action like a violent stabby film.
Yeah.
You get kind of immunized to the power of one bit of violence, or like even just a giallo film, right? Like violence becomes kind of comical and fun, and
sexy as well. Actually.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas the violence here, because you're for 3 hours your palate is cleansed by these kind of very banal, your barometer is kind of reset in terms of what is violence, like kind of dropping something is now violence basically by the third hour.
Yeah.
And so then when this actual act of really extreme violence, like one human killing another human spontaneously
no provocation.
Exactly, with no provocation. It's far more shocking than it. I mean, it's obviously to say, but it's far more shocking than it would be in a thriller of even. And that power is amazing. And I wrote a little list of sort of ways in which cause this greatest film of all time lens kind of. It made me think about the film differently, and I think this is why it's great that it won the list, that won the poll, because it now gets to be thought about in this way. It's not that I think it's the greatest film of all time, but I also don't think Citizen Kane and Vertigo are. But I think films like Jeanne DIELMAN, which are so unusual compared with most other films, should be thought about within that canon, because actually when we apply the same criteria to them, they meet the mark absolutely. And it has a hero's journey. This film has a protagonist that goes on a journey. It uses objects to create tension and dramatic irony.
It has a literal 3-act structure.
It has subplots, various, like the letter from the aunt and the shoes needing fixing, these things that sort of come and go that support the narrative. There's a balance of humor and seriousness. You feel this when you watch it with an audience. There's sometimes moments people laugh, sometimes moments people are shocked. There's a backstory that's revealed very skillfully through kind of oblique expository dialogue. It is totally, I'm sure there are other ways in which this is true, but it is a great piece of cinema, because those are all things that great pieces of cinema do and are measured by. And what it just happens to also basically be a structural film.
Yeah, it does. In the same way that one of the greatest structural films is Wavelength by Michael Snow,
which he was very influenced by, which was out 1967. So it was a few years beforehand, but not many years beforehand. What was that? Ralph's going to the fridge for a beer. Could you grab me a Estrella? My mate Estrella. There's actually I don't have a bottle open. There's a great. So a little nice choice anecdote about Jeanne DIELMAN as a film is there was a little bit of a game, one of these little power struggles, these moments between Akerman and Delphine Seyrig, where neither of them actually. One of the scenes focuses on Jeanne DIELMAN preparing a schnitzel. And actually, neither Chantal Akerman or Delphine Seyrig knew how to prepare this dish. Obviously, the scene is really dependent on Jeanne DIELMAN doing a routine action that she knows implicitly. This is not... They should have actually consulted with Pierre Kubelka, the master of the schnitzel. They should have had a schnitzel coordinator
A schnitzel
on set.
coordinator. That's what it's called in Germany.
Yeah. Schnitzel coordinator.
But it's amazing again where it is very believable. Actually, it kind of attests to, I think, the ultimately the nice little ASMR for you there. I guess the simpatico that Delphine Seyrig and Akerman and Chantal did understand each other and meet in understanding. But I think there's so many details about this where, despite spending 3 hours in this apartment, which is quite a reasonably sizable apartment, we get actually very little sense of how to navigate this space. It feels like quite an unreal living space because you can't really connect the rooms together. It's great. You spend so long in this place, you think you would be able to navigate it. But I think if I was plonked down in one of the rooms, I wouldn't know how to get from the kitchen to the bedroom. I think which is quite an interesting thing. And I think maybe it's actually something that actually Durat did as well with India Song, like the chateau in India Song.
Made the same year with Delphine Seyrig.
Yeah, impossible to navigate that place because it's a hall of mirrors. And you could say the same thing for Marienbad with Renee. Like a lot of these films we're really interested in the I guess the familiarity of habitual like domestic space, but also the impossibility of it in a way. I think the inability to navigate these rooms and halls. We're very much kind of following Jeanne DIELMAN in a way. You know, like you said, yeah, you do choose your close up, but we're very much enthralled to like her. She really dictates the action. We're fully in hock to her routine that she's created for herself in navigating this apartment. And so you do expect certain things to happen. You know, after she sleeps with a John, she opens the curtains and
opens the window to let it air out.
Let the cum smell evaporate from the room, I imagine. The smell of shame. But I think there's...
it's a ritual that makes you wonder... Like a lot of the rituals, even though some of them are so banal, they all invite you to wonder. And I don't mean this in a banal, like, make you think way. Yeah. I genuinely mean, like, when you're watching something, you start to look around. And when you're watching something, the same thing for a long time, you start to look around a lot. And I guess that's what's interesting about structural film. And we had this discussion when we did an episode about Michael Snow, and we had
Igor and Daniel.
Igor Tornilich and Daniel Niafetu, friends of the show, on. And we talked about wavelength and
at length,
and the other one, the Région Centrale, and I can't remember if it's Dan. I think it's Igor who's one of them. They're both quite sort of they like to provoke, but that one of them said that they preferred Région Centrale over wavelength because Région Centrale is literally just like on a mountain. It has no humans in it. It's just a camera sort of oscillating and revolving, you know, on a mechanical arm around for 3 hours around,
which was not programmed by Snow. That's the important difference to that film.
It was automatically
automated,
doing it.
So the camera,
not AI, but
he defaces the idea of the auteur in that film, basically. Yeah.
So this is the thing with structural film has a relationship with surveillance. Structural film, just to introduce structural film as a concept. There are various examples, like Lemon by Hollis Frampton is a good sort of like. It's a film where a lemon is
lit from multiple angles. Slowly.
And once it's basically been lit from a kind of 360 angle, the film ends. And it goes in and out, almost like the moon. It sort of goes in and out of
it looks like a planetary object, the lemon in that film, yeah.
So whereas narrative film basically operates, unfolds on the basis of the narrative content,
and the function of the edit
and the function
of montage,
you know, all of that, but all of the editing serves the needs of the narrative. And in structural film, all of that stuff serves essentially the unfolding of time. Would you say that?
I think it does have an important narrative element as well. Like particularly what Wavelength is fundamentally the subversion of a narrative film because it does contain a moment of eruption, a murder or death scene. So
but that's essentially like narrative film creeping in. That means like essentially it becoming a hybrid.
Of Richard Serra, maybe, which are structural films as well. They're on the periphery of the structural film movement because maybe he was a plastic artist and a paint and paper and pen
But
artist.
yeah,
I
there's,
think
there's
he's
sort
not
of like
considered.
a spectrum.
A lot of basically it was in the air in the 60s and in the early 70s. A lot of people were interested in the possibilities of structural film, which denied the idea of the auteur, which were films that were conditioned by the camera itself.
Yeah.
So Region Central was the inevitable endpoint of that, because it was a way for Michael Snow to disappear, the magician disappearing in a cloud of smoke, basically behind their own film, in a way.
And once you go off the edge of that extreme end of the spectrum, you basically end up with a CCTV camera.
Bazan's surveillance, basically. Yeah.
Because by that point, cinema is no longer in any way. Once you get to CCTV, cinema is no longer tethered by any like narrative function.
There's not a controlling authority, the auteur behind it. Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like pure narrative film, which is like anything you see on Netflix. Every angle, every cut, everything is there purely to serve you being entertained and finding out how the story
information.
Unpacks. So Jeanne Dielman is, for me, hitting this, what is for me the most interesting kind of midpoint between structural film and narrative film.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I like a narrative. I like people. I like finding out about humans.
That's the great beauty of film. This was always, certainly Eisenstein's point. It was later like Keynes. Wow, Wells' point, Orson Welles' point, which is that a film was made in the editing room. Film is made at that point. Until then, it's just materials.
Exactly.
That are then brought together in a way that is compelling and entertaining, and entertainment is important. And it serves a purpose, which is to inform. It's almost like the BBC Charter, to inform, educate, and entertain. And that's kind of what it does.
Orson Welles believed in, as we often say, Orson Welles believed in spectacle, which means that he was further towards that structural end of the spectrum in terms of believing that the unfolding of time in the camera was important.
I know we're sidebarring aggressively here, but there's an amazing thing. So when he was shooting The Magnificent Ambersons, there were a lot of shots, scenes which were actually rejected ultimately because they couldn't quite technically make them work. But there's one where the kind of this Midwest townhouse of the Ambersons, he wanted a scene where, from a POV lens, they strapped the camera rig to cameraman's chest, which is quite, I imagine, quite a bulk at the time.
Back in the day,
Back in 1942, 1943. And he wanted all of the rooms of the house to be shown. So he would walk around this enormous house and shoot it all. It didn't quite work because there was too much vibration. They couldn't quite strap the camera to the chest properly.
Right.
All these reasons. But, he was working with an RKO cinematographer, like a young guy who kind of got him. He wasn't working with Greg Toland on Magnificent Ambersons. He wasn't available because he'd gone off to war. But there's this amazing sense where, even Wells was in lots of ways a structural filmmaker because he understood, like Akerman, he had to drink in the space and show it in this kind of way that was quite shocking in a way. And maybe it took until 1975. There's you think not actually that much time elapsed between 1942 and 1975. It's really not that long a time to get to a point where a film like, you're right, like Jeanne Dielman, is impossible to imagine someone making Jeanne Dielman in 1940. And yet, this was a ripening moment for it. All the political winds and the discourse winds and the financial winds were pointing in the right direction. And you get this film, which is a monument to a very formally rigorous style of filmmaking, which I hate to say this, I'm going to do the thing, which is that you can't really imagine a film like this getting big money now.
Totally, yeah.
It would be a very different film. It would be a Netflix drama.
I mean, this is what was so ironic. I don't like to sound sort of embittered, but I think it's deeply ironic that the BFI, they were very proud of Jeanne Dielman winning... I know
what you're going to say, and I love it.
Winning the Greatest Film of All Time award via their magazine. They were very proud of the... kudos, First Woman, and the fact that it has these political themes and the fact that it's great. I support that too. But you look at the films the BFI generally funds these days. You look at generally like the state of British film industry, which mostly like outside of like the kind of very mainstream blockbusters is basically controlled by the BFI. Feminist or otherwise, they would never give a single cent to a film as formally audacious
Yeah.
as Jeanne Dielman. Absolutely no chance.
Because when
They
you
just
think
don't,
about it,
because it's extremely risky. It's a film that, and even now, you know, very few people had seen this film, and it is kind of elitist because, you know, and then there were critics complained about this, and I would say in response, it's elite because it's good. It's a good.
It's good. That's why there's a reason it's elitist.
But
look, put it this way: where did you watch this film the other night?
I wish that the Prince Charles wasn't
Right.
sold out. Actually,
But
sadly,
did you see this film at the BFI?
I also sold out at the BFI. Yeah,
Oh, they did show at the BFI.
they showed it at the BFI.
Okay, kudos to them.
They
Fair
did 2 screenings. They didn't show it enough, though. I think for a film that was a news item, essentially,
the best film
by
in the
being
world
number
according
one.
to them and their voting panel.
So Mark Jenkins had already, by coincidence, booked it in to. He was showing. Mark Jenkins, director of the.
Can we not just invoke this absolute
Mark
charlatan?
Jenkins, director of the very good film Bait, director of the absolutely awful fucking shite film Ennis Men, was allowed because they needed to flog his film a whole season of called The Anatomy of Ennis Men, where he got to show films that were influenced by him. He showed Jeanne Dielman twice. They moved one of the screens from NFT3 up to NFT1 because the film was suddenly gaining all this new kudos. I went to see it there for the second time. Obviously, I'd seen it when I was younger, and it was sold out, and that was very nice and fun to see it. And then and then they showed it maybe 3 times during their season of greatest films of all time. But then, you know, then the PCC showed it, Prince Charles Cinema, didn't sell out. I don't feel like, I feel like it's kind of hit saturation point, Jeanne Dielman. Basically, a lot of people, they hear about it, they're like, oh, that sounds, you know what I mean? Like, it's just...
It's a film people are glad exists, but won't necessarily commit, because again, like as a structural film, you know, the vast majority of structural films were, you know, maybe Regis and Charlotte excluded, were, you know, relatively short, and we're used to a bit more visual excitement from the avant-garde. Maybe, you know, even when you look at a film like Marienbad has broad popular appeal because it's short.
It's sexy as well.
It's sexy as hell.
Slick.
It's slick. It looks great. It's shot in this amazing, you know, kind of high contrast black and white. It looks incredible. It's very propulsive because you've got this very geometrical, fragmented editing style and use of blocking and camera work. You know, Jeanne Dielman is an effort. I think it is supposed to be. That was 100%.
But it's what's ironic is that it isn't. It, as we say, like it's not. It is actually very gripping. Yeah, and actually the time does go by.
I didn't look away very much during watching this film.
The time does go by like pretty comfortably.
Even watching a film like, you know, your mind can drift a lot more watching Andrei Rublev.
Yeah, it's true.
It really can, because you're almost overburdened with visual delights. And
in Andrei Rublev, you're like, oh, who's this guy again? Whereas like in this, like there are only 2 characters. It's like really simple. So you're then drawn to all these other interesting. I think it's one of the most engaging films.
We also, like, you know, there's a lot of problematizing about, let's go, oh, is it really the best film? But when you usually look at the top 50 or top 100, you go, well, there's a lot of stuff people don't see here. You know, there's a lot of John Ford and Howard Hawks and stuff. And it's like, how do people really watch that much John Ford and Howard Hawks these days? Probably
they're actually, I want to make a Hawksian point. There weren't any Hawks films in the top 100.
Were there not? I swear there were.
But there were like 4 in the top 250. So
there we go. So in a broader sense, yeah. But you've got these Powell and Pressburger. You've got a lot of like the, you know, and actually, how often are people watching Hitchcock these days? Like, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe these films aren't.
People are just watching After Sun.
People are just watching.
That's all.
So I think you could say that you could aim that criticism or that observation at the wider 100 or wider 250 and go, actually, a lot of these films are underwatched. And the valid point, I suppose, if you're a curator or program behind these top lists, the idea, I suppose, is to surface the films that are important. And a film like a director like Ford is super important. You know, Ford was instrumental for Wells as well. Wells watched Ford more than anything else. Like, you know, How Green Was My Valley and his films, he watched them. You know, he watched them back to back. You know, so I think these are important building blocks for so many directors. A film like Jeanne Dielman is highly instructive. I'm surprised. Yeah, I think the thing is, you get films like this now, and they have to be Tarantino-fied. That you get films like is it Hannah Lowe who made Prevenge? You get these films that drink from the cup of like female empowerment via violence, But they are
Yeah, I mean, and this is also the thing, like,
dazzling, or not dazzling, but they're more entertaining than they are clever.
I mean, we talked about this in the After Sun pod. Like After Sun obviously owes a huge debt to Chantal Akerman, and yet, like, it just is corny and sentimental in a way that Akerman never was, even though she was like the pivotal sad girl, like. It's a formal thing. It's about form, and that's what we always say on this podcast. Like, if you're not thinking about, it seems so basic to me. If you're not thinking about how you're constructing this work of art, if you're not like changing and innovating this delicious and beautiful array of tools you have for telling your story, or for simply giving people a moment with some people and some object, then you're not doing anything interesting, basically. If you're not actually considering that material, if you're just assuming all that language in order to say something.
A lot of people like to say, I'm influenced by, Mark Jenkins say I was influenced by Jean DIELMAN. But it's like, I can't see how.
Oh, I can sort of see how.
I can see with
he
Bates,
just made it
maybe,
with
Ennis Men.
With Ennis Men, no, but with Ennis Men, he just made a bad experimental film.
He had a terrible experimental.
Well, no, it was experimental, and I respect that, and I think we should fund things like that. But like, it was just bad. It was like it's possible to do these radical things, but also just do it badly.
Yeah, it's the outsized influence that a film like Ennis Men had, which was like people clapping and hooting and saying, finally a important English film. It's like, no, it's a facsimile of a defunct dead movement, which was the folk horror, the English folk horror.
But all these people are shills. They're paid. They don't really think this.
But I think I think that the amazing thing about there's even a sense of frustration with a film like Jean DIELMAN, because you are watching it and you think, well, if I was preparing dinner, I'd do it much faster. There's these little,
but
you're working against her ingrained.
I make a great mess when I make dinner.
Yeah, we are not the.
I'm very. She is very tidy. To be fair,
she's very tidy, but that's part of the.
Oh, this amazing bit. Sorry, we are playing it on in the background. There's an amazing bit where, and this is actually probably the first moment where something goes wrong. Not the potatoes bit, but actually when she is washing a dish and it's covered in pushing up liquid. You can't see it. It's not this plate. It's the next plate she puts on. But she doesn't. Then she notices that it's covered in.
It's not quite. The job's not quite done.
Yeah, God, it's so slow.
And she's like, no, that's uncharacteristic of me. I've done this thing.
It's a real moment, a moment of insight into, and it's because these acts are so banal, and because we've all done them, that you see. You see into her mind, because it's
see into her mind without looking at her face.
It's so relatable. It's like observational comedy almost.
Yeah, and we're used to the face being there's the window into the soul, but Akerman's very clever because she's shooting Delphine Seyrig from the back, so we can't actually see her reaction. We can't see what's going through her face. Or we've got the gestures, and not in such a mannerist way as Bresson, who will show us the hand putting the plate in the drying rack and lingering there. I think she's allows the eye to rove. She allows us to miss things, which is very daring. She's actually saying, Bresson was like, this is an important gesture, corporeal gesture, so I'm going to show you that fucking gesture. Whereas actually with Akerman, she's like, you might miss this. Yeah, you could watch Jean DIELMAN and go, it's a film about a woman who does tasks and then kills someone. I miss
loads of things each time. Yeah, not because my mind's wandering, but because I'm like, still thinking about the last thing. It's just like you just slows down your
replay value.
It's actually different. The dish, she washes the dishes again later. That's when she.
Oh, because she realized she hasn't quite done the. Yeah,
I can't remember, but it's not that dishes washing moment is actually fine. Anyway, I have a great quote from Laura Mulvey.
I know that name. We all know that name, don't
Laura
we?
Mulvey, yeah. She wrote Visual Pleasure. And she made films as well with Peter Wallen. She wrote an article for Sight and Sound upon the occasion of this film becoming number one. Yeah. And the most interesting sentence I found in the article was, when a shot is held beyond normal expectation, the flow of time belonging to the fiction begins to fade, and the time of its recording comes to the fore. And I think this is interesting because I think we don't talk about it so much on this pod, but like the distinction between the diegetic world. Yeah. I think that installation by Christian Markley, The Clock. Yeah, The Clock. The 24-hour film, which is like for listeners who don't know it, is a 24-hour film, which is a compilation of mostly narrative films.
Where every second is from a different film.
Yeah. No, not every second, but there's each scene has a clock in it or some sort of timepiece.
And it lasts 24 hours and the clocks are always at the time that you should be at. Yeah.
But some of the films, it's just a clock in the background that happened to be that time.
Yeah.
And in some of the films, the clock is like we're counting down to 3 o'clock. So when you get to an hour point in Christian Markle's called The Clock, you're like, oh yeah, we need to do it by 3 p.m. You know, it's like a film where time is really important, and then other moments between the hours, sometimes it's like the time is less important.
Yeah,
it's just a clock in the background. So it was just when they happened to do that take, and that's like the difference between like recorded non-diegetic time and like diegetic time, and the point that Mulvey's making is that when you shoot stuff with like this, like Jeanne DIELMAN, the longer that shot goes on for, that this unease. It's almost like when you tell a joke and it stops being funny and then it starts being funny again. There's this like time
sort of Norm
unfolding.
Macdonald's approach to the joke.
There's like a thing where the time, like we start to, we're just watching her do a task. After a while, like we forget this narrative content that we've been told is happening.
Our brain switches off and wants to.
And then we tune back into the fact that we've just been here for a while and this person on screen has been here for a while. And then it starts to become more like surveillance and more structural and more interesting. And that's the point. And that's where art house film, that's why I think we get quite annoyed with what we call more middle of the road art house films. You know, films that are made in a bit of an arty way, but not really.
Well, they're pretentious.
Exactly, pretentious
in a way
films.
That,
and the films
Jeanne
that
DIELMAN is not.
And the films that put people off this kind of cinema, because basically they don't commit enough to that structural.
Well, we
dimension.
said this about After Summer. Like the actual correct way to shoot After Summer was entirely on video, mini DV cam or the camcorder. But with Akerman with Jeanne DIELMAN was explicitly setting out to dismantle the hierarchy of images. To in her own words, to say that, you know, why should a kiss or a car crash be more important than someone doing the dishes or peeling a potato? And she's making a comment about film, not just about gendered labor, but that's important as well. But she's making a kind of laying her tools out about filmmaking as well. Whilst I think mastering a lot of the, you know, at 25, mastering in, you know, a lot of the understanding of what narrative is, in a way, you know, like you said, you know, there are a lot of knowing that the scissors are slowly being set up as an important prop device in the film. I also think there's there's a sense of, I don't know what point I'm trying to make, a sense of kind of almost kookiness to it. It is provocation, a film like Jeanne DIELMAN. It doesn't, you know, the fact that it is so long, you know, it's extraordinary length is a provocation. Subject matter is a provocation. And it's still a very playful and entertaining film in a way that, it is accessible. Actually, it sounds like I'm being provocative by saying that, but it's a very accessible film because it's not dealing with highfalutin ideas. It's not trying to lead you down a garden path. Everything you need is there. It's a piece of high modernism. I suppose in a lot of senses, maybe one of the closest points at which film came to being high modernist, and similar but different to a film like Marion Bad, which is differently modernist. And I think, I mean, the minutiae, the marginalia being foregrounded are very important. Just at every level, you know, even at the level of production design, you know, it's very well thought out, this apartment that is, you know, it doesn't feel like a home. You know, it's kind of stuffy and uncomfortable looking. There's something about the flat that just doesn't feel lived in.
I mean,
it feels super functional. It feels like going to then you can imagine that a nunnery is like that.
I think because it's sort of the production design is constantly gesturing towards this like beautiful carefree life, and I think this is, you know, because basically Chantal, because Jeanne DIELMAN is a film about a normie that will never be watched by normies. Like not even after Sight and Sound. Like normies are never going to watch this film, unfortunately.
Now it'd be like Jeanne DIELMAN has to order from DoorDash or like Uber Eats.
But maybe I sound like a prick saying normie a lot, but like like Jean Dillman is a film that is doing something so interesting with form, and I don't really see why it would be boring to anyone. But and for me, fundamentally, there are like a trillion more boring films where loads more happens. But I also understand that, like, for whatever reason, this film can't like reach everyone.
This is a call out to our listeners and say, ladies, get your, maybe you have a significant other in your life, maybe you're married, maybe you're dating, take that person, that SO in your life, and show them Jean Dillman. It'll be the making or breaking.
And if it's the breaking, you better be the end.
It might be. If they're bored, then out the door.
I was immensely ambiguous about Jean Dillman becoming the greatest film of all time, because my first reaction was, well, I prefer Je tu es là, which is in
I
a
prefer
way.
Letters from Home, but
and both of these are slightly less palatable, because I think Jean Dillman has
Letters from Home is pretentious, actually. I think it hits more of the pretentious barrier, because it's a wordy ideas film, and it's aware of the nonsense.
It's essayistic, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I like Jean Dillman because, like, there's a fucking bit where this truck driver is like, I want to fuck my daughter. And then Chantal Akerman's character is like, okay. And then tosses him off. Like, it's an exceedingly like indulgent and weird film that like has no
well, it's a journeyman work which enabled her to have the breakthrough to make a film like Jean Dillman, which is formally very bold, enormously restrained.
Meat is also a fantastic Chantal.
Yeah.
There's lots. I mean, the only Chantal Akerman we ever reviewed was like probably her worst film, which was the one with Juliette Binoche and William Hurt. But I guess,
oh god, yeah, Couch in New York.
Yeah, it's a great episode with Daniel Neff, but it's a bit of a joke.
I think that was a lockdown. Wasn't it? Yeah, we were all a little bit fucking mad. Whereas I think watching Jean Dillman during lockdown would have fucking finished me off.
Yeah, true. Actually, yeah,
I'd have licked fucking I would have licked like a guardrail in a public toilet at that point. I just fucking end it all. It's like it's very much a film you then want to go out and go to a cafe or a pub or something. I think after watching
you need to chill out.
You need to. It is a lot. It's the burden is present in the sense of the weight of its monotony.
But cinema should do that, and it's a shame that many people feel that cinema is just something they should unwind to and relax to. I mean, cinema should like encroach on your psyche in an important way, and I think this is what's so ambiguous, is that I think a lot of people, I mean, I spoke to curators in the last 10 years, I guess, who said, oh yes, whenever anyone asks what my favorite film is of all time, I always say Jean Dillman, not because it's my favorite film, but because it's a film by a woman and we should have films.
So cynical.
No, but I mean, it's cynical, but then these were people, they were men. There's one guy I'm talking about.
Oh, sorry, not men, they were allies.
But like at men, there were a lot of cases of ally-oriented men. I find being an ally deeply cringe, and I will never be an ally because it's just lame. But like, cool, like whatever.
It's chuggy.
I'm left-wing. I support all the good things, but like
I know what you mean.
Being an ally, shut up. But like, a lot of people who like voted for Jean Dillman because they were like, a woman should win, and it's ridiculous, man. All the films made by men, we should have a woman do it. But also, they genuinely liked it because it's a great film.
It is a great film.
But like, I worry that it winning the award, winning the number one,
it doesn't matter.
Because it has this narrative around female labor that is like, you can have a simplistic reading of it where you say, oh, it's about the suffering of women under the patriarchy that drives them to kill.
But it is also about film. It's I think if anything we've extracted in the last hour, yes, that reading does apply, but it is also a confrontation about the idea of film, and very much exists within the ecosystem of the structural film.
No, totally.
Widely, it's very much part of that universe. And I think you could say like Richard Serra was a very I suppose gendered structural filmmaker in a lot of ways, because in the masculine sense, because a lot of
stuff was led by the male gaze.
Oh no, not so much led by the male gaze, but like the types of actions that he shot repeated actions, so hand gripping lead in films like this, which were very much big, beefy, hairy male hands repeating physical actions, and that was Richard Serra's filmic output. He made about, I guess, 10 or 12 films for a period when he was briefly interested in filmmaking. And you can say from the other end, but they were also actually dumber films in a way, like, because they weren't really about filmmaking. They were very explicitly just about the gesture. And he got what he needed from film and then moved back to sculpture. But I feel like Jeanne Dielman very much exists as a comment and critique of the hierarchy of images, and is a critique of filmmaking in general, which is gendered, I suppose. But
yeah, and I don't think Akerman would ever rebuke an explicit political reading of it, because the subject matter is clear, and Jeanne Dielman's life is miserable.
Miserable.
And I, I don't really have a problem with that, but I guess I have a problem with it being privileged above other equally fantastic structural works, because it's kind of
it is discoursey. Yeah, I mean,
because it's got like, you can kill all men if
arguably Wavelength, I think, is probably a more brilliant film.
I mean, I love
Wavelength. It's one of my favorite films. Because it surfaces a lot. It has a lot more fun, basically, and I think fun is an important factor in filmmaking, whatever. But it's much more on the nose and playful about what it's doing about filmmaking, by keeping moments of narrative catharsis or eruption out of shot, or partly in shot. This scene with the death. I think Wavelength is an extraordinary film, one of the greatest films ever made. But
Definitely.
Whatever. I think maybe if people did vote for Jeanne Dielman to be number one on the list, it was partly out of laziness or angst, but whatever, I don't care. It's such a good film. It's like, it is a really...
you could never tell those people they liked it for the wrong reasons, because it's such a tremendous film. But it is like...
and it's one of the better slow
I would just
films.
want to hold the BFI to account to say, okay, so you think... And this is what I'll end on this, like...
Yeah.
It was very annoying that Sight and Sound did an interview with Spike Lee recently. Yeah. Spike Lee, who I've seen a small handful of his films, which I like.
Do the Right Thing is obviously a heater,
which I like perfectly well. He's not one of my favorites, but he's whatever, cool. They opened a video interview with him, answering a question. When you do an interview, and now
you have the salacious thing at the beginning.
You have to show the most exciting bit at the start. And they showed him being asked whether he'd seen Jeanne Dielman, and he was like, "Nope." And the interviewer's like, have you heard of the film? He's like, "Nope." And he's like, do you plan on watching the film? And he's like, "Nope." And it's like, you are doing a grave disservice. Like, I don't care.
That's idiotic. Of course he's heard of it. He's heard of it, though. He's very aware of Chantal Akerman. He's not aware of Chantal Akerman. He doesn't care. Lots of people don't care. Lots of people have made great films without ever seeing Jeanne Dielman. However, I don't... he should have seen... But he hasn't made a good film in ages.
He should have seen Jeanne Dielman. Everyone should see Jeanne Dielman, because it's a fantastic film. What is Sight and Sound playing at? What is the BFI playing at? Kind of telling everyone that this film is the best thing since sliced bread, because it's feminist, and then saying, "Oh, look, this great heroic black director has never heard of it." Ha ha ha.
I read that more as like I feel he came off worse in that exchange.
But then why make it so prominent? Because
it was clickbaity. Because they want eyeballs, and really the list is about eyeballs on films, and it was
but
great.
They should have the courage of their commitment. They should say, yes, we asked the best people in the business what the best film was, and they selected
I've
this
never
great
seen
film.
a fulsome defense by the BFI really of why Jeanne Dielman deserves this place. And that argument can be made.
Mulvey's essay was that.
Yeah, but I didn't read that. I didn't know it existed.
Okay. Well, I bought the magazine. I bought the magazine, and when you get to the bit where it tells you what number one is, there's an essay.
She did
there's
the
an essay by
text.
Laura not Mulvey, and it's a good.
But that's not enough. They're not making enough of a song and dance about what this also means for filmmaking and how this could encourage filmmakers to,
No, of course they aren't. Yeah. But a lot of apparatchiks of the BFI said, "Oh, this is a great like
breakthrough,
a great sideways choice, and it's a woman." Blah blah blah. But put your money where your mouth is. Like, now you should really fund, not just fun stuff because it's feminist.
Okay, so
fun stuff because it's structural, because it's reinventing the form of cinema.
If the BFI listening to this, so I've got a proposal, I've got a pitch, and it's called John Dielman. And it's basically about a guy that goes
To see prostitutes.
see prostitutes all day, and he goes to have one, and his condom splits, and it causes a series of precipitous, like, kind of unraveling. This kind of ruins his day. That's the film, and it ends with him.
But he doesn't actually really notice. Like he's
completely unobservant.
Shit, maybe I've got a son now, but
I guess.
I
So
guess I
John
won't hear about it.
DIELMAN. He's a carpet salesman.
Right. For Allied carpets.
For Allied carpets, yeah. So if the BFI are listening to this and they want to, it's actually 18 hours long. The script, because he visits a lot of sex workers. A lot. But if the BFI are listening and they want to fund that film, then put your money where its mouth is. I think the film will cost.
Whose mouth?
Well, exactly. But I'm here.
Yeah, I think it's a form content thing.
Yes,
and I'm ready for everyone to see the light. And
I'm interested for people because I think there are grabbier films within the slow cinema movement. I think Veers Ethical is actually extraordinary. Blah blah blah. You got people like Lav Diaz, and Lav Diaz's approach to duration is so different and much more bound up with an immediate kind of political ethno-historical context in a way that Jean DIELMAN isn't. And I think I think Dorsky writes really well in devotional cinema about kind of duration and it's kind of affect, I suppose. But I think maybe Jean DIELMAN is the most competent and the most interesting, intellectually most interesting kind of slow film in a way that Lav Diaz is a kind of shock jock, because his big thing when people interview him and go, a lot of people call your film slow film. What are your feelings about slow film? He's like, slow film doesn't exist, man. It's just like film. It's like, no, there is a thing. This is a literal. This is a mode, a typology of filmmaking that you're, take it more seriously. It kind of annoys me a bit. As much as I love Diaz, because it's also baller to make an 18-hour film, but I think a lot of his 18 hours are filled with nothing, and they aren't serving the purpose of slowness.
But he's doing that for a political reason. He's saying that
look at this.
Look at the suffering of my country, people, and you will see. You will see something. You will go. He actually wants the audience to suffer. I think. I did watch an interview with. I was at an event where he spoke about this. Whereas I think DIELMAN, there's an element of enduring the labor, but she still is working with the tension of cinema. Yeah,
there's all the props of we said Chekhov's scissors, all the things.
Exactly,
it is still a narrative.
It's extremely engaging.
Yeah, very engaging.
And I've seen it 3 times now. I saw it because I saw it in January, and I thought, fuck, it was on at the PCC, and I was like, and we're doing a podcast. It's on. I should probably just go see it again.
I was watching Argento at the same time. Across the city.
I saw it more recently. He saw it 2 weeks ago. Yeah. But I was just like, I got to see it again. I've seen it 3 times, and it's still very, very engaging. I would watch it. I would wait a few years before watching it again, but it is it is a fucking heater. You've just got it on at the moment on the laptop. It's
pretty compelling.
Just watching the veal being.
I could eat a schnitzel actually.
I could. Maybe we'll order schnitzel later. Yeah. One last question. In 2032, I can't calculate how old you'll be, but I will be
in 10 years' time.
37.
Jesus, I'm going to be 45.
You mean you're 45?
Fuck me, man. But
we'll still have our youth.
Lost fading glimmers of it.
Exactly. Do you think Jean DIELMAN will still be number one?
There could be a bit of inertia in the way that,
and if not, what will be?
Vertigo kind of stuck around for a bit. I think these things tend to. I can't
just stick around. It was when I won once, and then it
was it only once.
Only once. It was number 2 for
there we go. That's what I'm confusing with. Maybe, yeah. I can see another provocation. I think Jean DIELMAN has set the tone for provocation.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be another provocative. In 10 years' time, there'll be another provocative film that will. I think maybe you'll see. It really depends on what the currents are in the next 10 years of filmmaking.
There'll be a sort of Robin Hood. What was that thing where everyone invested in stock that wasn't very profitable?
Oh yeah,
there'll be a GameStop. Yeah,
GameStop. Yeah,
there'll be a GameStop style campaign to make some ridiculous film.
Buy the
number
dip.
1. Yeah.
I don't know. There'll be I think if it's not Jean DIELMAN, I think just inertia could mean it still is Jean DIELMAN, because people are like, oh, I think this is supposed to be the best film ever made. Okay, maybe it will be
continuity prevails. No, I think that
Yeah.
my position. I think there's going to be a vibe shift.
It's going to be
Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, I could really see Lynch.
I think in
as our
2030
times become more unhinged,
Yeah.
Lynch is going to have his moment. It could be
Cause
Inland
he
Empire.
lives,
No, I think it'll be. No, it won't be because
Trump's second term. I
third
think
by that point.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Is it possible to do that?
No.
If you can, even if they're separated, you can't have. Anyway, this is politics.
Oh no, no. Wait. So my if it is Lynch, then it's going to be not Mulholland Drive. I think it will be a film like Inland Empire or something like that. It will be
no. It has to be something that's kind of in somewhere in the. I mean, this was like, to be fair,
36.
This is number 36. So it could be anything in the top 40 right now.
I think it might be Greta Gerwig's Barbie.
It could just like woke culture could just carry on.
Wait, do you think the BFI is going to exist in 10 years?
That's another big question.
It'll be
vote Sunak 2024 to abolish all arts, all nationally funded.
It's going to be Sight and Sound in association with lastminute.com.
Yeah. I think. Yeah, like wokeism could just like intensify, and it will be like the Watermelon Woman or like Portrait of a Lady on Fire or something ridiculous. But like, I think probably like that has sort of peaked, and it will be like a more modern, recent film that is classically brilliant in the way that Mulholland Drive is, and also experimental.
Yeah, it could be Mully.
I think it will be Mulholland Drive.
It could be Mully
because it moved up quite. That's my prediction, because I think it does have to be a different film now. The set, because Jean DIELMAN is not like fit for purpose as a kind of Citizen Kane style regular.
Yeah, because Citizen Kane is demotic. It is very much like a populist film. Anyone can watch Citizen Kane and have a really, really good time. It's entertaining as fuck. So I think on that basis, it has to be, because Citizen Kane is a film that normies watch, and they're like, "Oh, I'm watching a film, like a kind it's black and white.
I'm watching like a film that film people like."
Yeah.
Whereas Jean DIELMAN, like fucking no one watches Jean DIELMAN, man. Like not even now. Like everyone was saying that it was going to be watched by loads of like normies, and it's like still no one. It's just film people watching it again.
Barrett Box Baz is like getting his microwave jar Phrasey out, and he's going, "I'm gonna put a film on tonight. I'm gonna watch this. I suppose the best film in the world, love." Like the 3 hours and 15 minutes.
The wife's fucking gone to sleep.
She's gone to sleep. I'm having a riveting time learning about the formation of a subject under late capitalism, actually, and gendered labour. Sorry, we're being deeply classist there, but that's because...
Yeah, well, we've been sexist as well, so that's
fine. Go on. I also went to a state school, so,
True, I didn't. No, I did, but part of the time.
MoveTube is dialectical. MoveTube is dialectical.
On that note, next up, we will be reviewing. Don't want to put you on the spot here, but we haven't decided what we're going to review next. What are we going to
review? We both watched. We talked about Bresson today. We both watched Femme Douce recently. I recently watched L'Argent again. So we could do a little Bressy, but we like I hate to say not B-sides, but the lesser watched Bressons maybe. That could be interesting. I think we've also both recently watched Andrei Rublev, and we could break out omerta about not talking about Tarkovsky. Yeah,
I feel like there's a general omerta about Bresson and Tarkovsky, who are basically our lodestars as filmmakers.
Two of our favourite filmmakers.
So the next episode will probably be a review of one of their films, but as you mentioned in the previous pod, we should probably widen our geographical
it
vision.
Could be time to
maybe some Simon Yang or
we've talked this is the thing, we talk about this also at the end of every episode, which is the ill-fated Hu Shaoshen film, but we could also do
we're waiting for the City of Sadness restoration to be,
which isn't a proper restoration, is
it not?
This is an upscaling.
Get
out. But there's also Luye. Suzu River is having its proper restoration.
Oh, that's actually coming out.
And that is a fucking heater.
Okay, Suzu River. Well, we'll review Suzu River as soon as we can get our hands on a restoration. We're not doing any festivals for a while because Owen's lost his passport and I don't have any money.
I also have no money.
And Owen also has no money. And so we probably will just review the classics.
But we all know we're doing a film on film festival.
And we're also going to the Film on Film Festival at the BFI, which ultimately, as Eminem used to say at the end of his songs, I'm just playing BFI. You know I love you.
But yeah, we will do. We'll do.
We will be
We'll do
returning
a
to the
festival
BFI.
report from.
We'll do a report from Film on
I think just
Film.
one. We'll do one longish.
Because we're seeing some Nitro. We're seeing Mildred Pierce. We're seeing the expanded thing, and we're seeing Blood and Sand on Nitrate.
Yeah.
Once in a lifetime.
If we don't die in a fire, a nitrate based fire.
To die by your side. Indeed. We will. If we don't do that dying fire thing, we will be right there with you every step of the way for Film on Film.
Yep.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.